Welcome, my bountiful friends. Board up the windows, lock all the doors, and hide in your basement if you have one. Be sure to grab yourself a coffee and a slice of blueberry pie on the way. But whatever you do, leave the sugar bowl alone. Today we're going to be delving deep into Shirley Jackson's haunting and enigmatic final novel, We Have Always Lived in the Castle. This Gothic masterpiece is a gripping blend of mystery, psychological insight, and has a dark, fairy tale-like quality. I'll be discussing the novel's background, running through its intriguing plot, exploring its central themes, examining Jackson's distinctive style, and looking at the critical reception it's received over the years. There will be a copious amount of spoilers, you have been warned. So settle in and let's begin our journey into the troubled world of the Blackwood family and their eerie, isolated life. Shirley Jackson was no stranger to the macabre. Her writing career started in 1943, and she initially became famous for her chilling short stories, including such standout tales as The Lottery, published in 1948. Her greatest renown is her outstanding 1959 psychological horror novel, The Haunting of Hill House, which has been adapted into film and TV series several times. Jackson's work often explores themes of alienation, societal cruelty, and the fragile nature of the human mind. We Have Always Lived in the Castle was her final novel and was published in 1962, just 3 years before her untimely death from a heart condition. It reflects her mastery of blending psychological complexity with unsettling Gothic elements. At the time, she was grappling with agoraphobia and a variety of health issues, and her personal struggles deeply influenced the novel's themes of isolation and societal rejection. The story is set in an unnamed fictional small town in New England, a region Jackson often used to critique the oppressive ultra-conservative norms of mid-20th century American society. And the action is focused on the remnants of the wealthy but deeply reclusive Blackwood family. Theirs is a story marked by tragedy and isolation. We understand from the very first pages that there has been an incident of poisoning, and eventually learn that the parents, an aunt, and a brother have all died, and that now only 3 members of the family remain. We Have Always Lived in the Castle is a novel very much of its time. In 1962, commercial TV was only about 12 years old and was in about 50% of American homes. The main entertainment was the movie theatre, and in particular the drive-in. The biggest hit of the year was the jazz instrumental Stranger on the Shore by Acker Bilk, and in small towns all across the nation, everyone knew everyone else in the neighbourhood and their business, and a person's reputation really mattered. That all said, all outward appearances aside, the themes of social isolation and home as one's sanctuary and refuge from the vagaries of a hostile outside world and alien society still resonates deeply within the 21st century. Constance is the eldest of the Blackwood's children, and following the passing of her parents, is now the primary caregiver in the household, taking care of both her younger sister and her uncle. She has assumed a maternal role that is far in advance of her young age. She is kind, nurturing, forgiving and calm, which is in stark contrast to Merrycat's volatile and highly strung nature. She was accused of the murder of her parents' aunt and brother, but acquitted due to the lack of evidence. Despite her acquittal, the townspeople still hold an immense dislike for the Blackwood family and ostracize her and the other surviving Blackwoods. Despite being free of any criminal penalty, Constance has become a total recluse, refusing to leave the Blackwood estate. She is never seen in town at any point. All her time is instead spent running the extensive household and cooking and cleaning and caring for Uncle Julian. She initially welcomes cousin Charles, seeing him as a potential connection to the outside world. After the fire, she decides to reject society entirely, retreating with Mary Cat into the ruins of their home, choosing isolation over further conflict or judgment. Mary Catherine Blackwood, better known as Mary Cat, is Constance's younger sibling. The novel is narrated by her distinctly unsettling childlike voice. She's 18 years old and lives seemingly in awe of her elder sister. She is obsessed with preserving her isolated insular life. She has a strong attachment to Constance and views her as a protector and a source of stability. She lives with her sister and uncle in the family's sprawling mansion. Mary Cat is the one member of the surviving family who regularly ventures into the village, about once a week, for supplies. These trips are filled with palpable hostility as she receives taunts and jeers from the townsfolk, which serve to further reinforce the Blackwoods' isolation. Mary Cat copes with her reality by retreating into magical thinking, burying charms and practicing rituals she believes will protect her and her family home. She has a wealth of knowledge of poisons, which may possibly have been taught to her by her elder sister. Jonas is Mary Cat's cat and constant companion. Though an animal, Jonas plays a symbolic role in the story as a reflection of Mary Cat's personality and her connection to nature and her rituals. His presence provides a sense of comfort and stability amidst the chaos of the story. Uncle Julian is the sole surviving elder of the family. He's now disabled and mentally frail due to arsenic poisoning. He spends his day obsessing and documenting the events of that fateful day which took the life of his wife Dorothy. He appears to be perpetually engaged in compiling notes on the family's tragic history and is completely preoccupied with the past, driven by a desire to understand and record the events that led to the family's demise. He seeks validation for his work, for a project that will in all probability never be completed. He relives the poisoning through constant retellings, though his recollections are often muddled. His seeming frailty serves as an excuse for Constance to remain secluded in the house, as she is his self-declared carer. He is both an object of pity and comic relief throughout the story. Cousin Charles is a distant relative who arrives uninvited at the Blackwood mansion, apparently to reconnect with the family. However, his true motivations are quickly revealed to be self-serving. He is clearly enamoured by outward displays of wealth and the finer things in life, and has been drawn by the Blackwoods' wealth. Much of the story concerns his intrusion into the Blackwood sisters' inner sanctum, as he seeks an opportunity to assert control over Constance and the estate. He is suave and educated, and seeks to use his charms to manipulate Constance into forming a relationship with him. After some initial success, his disdain for Mary Cat and Julian betrays his lack of genuine familial concern. The friction between himself and Mary Cat serves as the catalyst in the final act, which results in his expulsion from the family and solidifies the sisters' isolation. Helen Clark is a former friend of Ellen Blackwood who attempts to maintain a semblance of social connection, primarily through Constance, despite the town's feeling of hostility to her. She occasionally visits in an attempt to cajole Constance into making a return into polite society. While all her intentions appear to be genuine, there is an element of discomfort, prying, and a clear inability to understand the Blackwood sisters' troubled mental state. The townsfolk can largely be viewed as a collective character, embodying the cruelty and mob mentality so redolent of small-town life. They willfully ostracise the Blackwoods, primarily as a means of extracting revenge, now that John Blackwood is no longer around to exert his will upon them. They are initially shown to be suspicious, jealous, and fearful of difference. They openly resent the Blackwoods for their wealth and reclusiveness. They find perverse satisfaction in mocking and scapegoating the family, and permit Mary Cat to be openly abused on her trips into town by both adult and children alike. Their behaviour reinforces the sisters' decision to completely withdraw from society. Interestingly, in the last act, the townsfolk appeared to recognise that they have gone too far in their bullying and unchristian behaviour. Several of their number seek absolution or else to make amends by leaving gifts at the ruins of the house as offerings to the sisters. The deceased Blackwoods loom large throughout the novel, even though very little is said about their personalities or their deeds. There is John Blackwood, who was the patriarch of the family, and Constant and Mary Cat's father. He is described as a strict and imposing figure. Then we have his wife and their mother, Ellen Blackwood. She is implied to be a traditional mother figure and somewhat overbearing. Thomas is their brother and appears to be younger than the two sisters. There is virtually nothing said about him other than that they used to play with him. But unlike their parents, the two sisters do not malign his memory. Finally, we have Aunt Dorothy, who was Julian's wife. She is described as being a critical and nosy woman who was living with them all at the time of her death. The story opens on one of Mary Cat's regular weekly visits to town to pick up supplies for Constance. The reputation of Blackwoods is so bad that she suffers open abuse from both young and middle-aged members of the community. She speedily returns to the mansion and immediately engages in magical rituals in an attempt to prevent further incursions on the house and the family. Shortly after this, the sisters are visited by Helen Clark, who is making yet another attempt to reintegrate them back into the town society, but with little success. And as soon as she's gone, shortly after this, Cousin Charles then arrives at the house, declaring his intention to stay on a prolonged visit. This is the start of his campaign to insinuate himself into the household, woo Constance, and assume control of the substantial Blackwood family finances. Cousin Charles's interloping is initially successful. He begins to enamour Constance with his tales of the outside world, a world which she is denied. There is also an implied sexual chemistry between the two, which is again another aspect of the world which is denied to Constance. Mary Cat resents the intrusion into her routine life and the disruption of her relationship with her sister. She quickly resents Charles's presence and she initiates a series of minor annoyances to drive the latter out from their sanctuary. Charles has other ideas and the two quickly come to loggerheads, with Charles threatening to have Mary Cat removed from the house. This spurs Mary Cat into using his lit pipe to start a fire in the Blackwood mansion. The fire brigade is duly summoned by Cousin Charles, and the majority of the town also turns up. But their animosity of the Blackwoods is now so much that instead of assisting, they stand outside chanting, "Burn it down!" while others begin to loot the house. By the time order is restored by the fire chief, the fire has advanced too far to be extinguished. And Uncle Julian has also succumbed from the shock of it all. The next day, amongst the smoking ruins, Constance dismisses Charles, and the two sisters lock themselves into the still intact basement. They have made their decision to remain together and escape society further by completely secluding themselves. The townsfolk, regretful of their actions from the previous night, begin to turn up and leave offerings outside the basement door. Jackson's writing style in We Have Always Lived in the Castle is one of its greatest strengths. The narrative voice of Mary Cat is deceptively simple, yet layered with dark humour, childlike innocence, and a hint of madness. Jackson deploys a standard literary device called the unreliable narrator. The unreliable narrator device typically operates in two ways. The narrator will present events through the filter of their own memory and biases, often lying to themselves as much to anyone that they are interacting with. The other way the device works is for the narrator to omit events. The reader is thus left trying to work out what actually occurred and who did what. By deploying the device, Jackson keeps readers off balance and forces them to constantly question the reality and accuracy of the story. The prose is haunting and lyrical, blending mundane details with chilling imagery. Jackson's ability to evoke mood with precision makes every page bristle with tension. For myself, the most standout aspect of her writing in this novel is her treatment of food. She vividly details descriptions of food that are deeply sensual, verging almost on the obscene. In particular, Constance's preparations of elaborate dishes like cakes, pies and preserves are intricately detailed. One such example of this is the creation of a golden pie crust, which reads as follows: golden, flaking crust that cracked gently under the weight of the spoon, releasing a warm, spiced aroma of cinnamon and apples that filled the room like a lingering embrace. Another, in reference to the preparation of preserves, reads: the jars of cherry preserves shimmered like rubies in the dim pantry light, their thick, sticky sweetness clinging to the spoon as though reluctant to be parted from its home. The intricate treatment of food also occurs with Merricat's rituals, which often feature food. Her specific way of consuming or rejecting certain items further highlights her childlike and obsessive tendencies. The central focus on the two sisters' interaction with food is also in contrast to the lingering shadow of the poisoned sugar bowl and the fatal last meal of their parents. Food amplifies the tension and duality in the novel. Food is both a source of comfort and of death. It should be noted that it is also the means by which the townsfolk attempt to make amends and show their regret of their actions by leaving offerings to the two sisters at the end of the novel. We Have Always Lived in the Castle is a rich tapestry of themes, many of which resonate deeply with modern readers. It is my opinion that there are two central themes in play within the novel, and they are both directly relatable to Shirley Jackson's attitudes and her own troubled psychology at the time. The first theme is home as the castle. There is the famous English saying, "An Englishman's home is his castle." In Shirley Jackson's novel, the Blackwood Mansion is Constance and Merricat's castle. In their home, they are free from the coarse thoughts and attitudes of the common townsfolk, and they are free to enjoy the luxuries of fine furnishings, fine food, and refined conversation. Constance, just like Jackson in real life, is agoraphobic. She has retreated from the harsh outside world altogether and won't leave the safe confines of her home. Merricat, who is forced to venture out in the world purely to secure provisions, is further psychologically damaged by her interactions there. Both sisters shun the outside world society and its rituals and instead seek solace via their own protective rituals in the controllable environment of their home. It is familiar and it is theirs. They have complete control over who can and cannot enter, at least until cousin Charles turns up. He is able to use his blood as a means to invade their sanctum, and Merricat is forced to take drastic action in order to evict him, resulting in a significant diminishment of their abode. But even with the home left a fraction of its former glory, it is still big enough for them to further retreat from the harm of other people. Perhaps the message here is that no matter the size of your own castle, it will still be sufficient for you to hide away in. You just need to make sure you guard the threshold effectively enough. The other main theme is the villainy of society. Jackson critiques the cruelty of small town life, where fear of difference leads to mob mentality and scapegoating. The townsfolk become as monstrous as any horror Jackson could conjure, highlighting the real terror of human nature. Society forces itself onto people and makes them conform. If they refuse to conform, then it will send out its members to destroy them. But the Blackwoods have never had any need for society. When John Blackwood was around, he dominated the society with his own resources. He was perhaps even the leading force of that society at the time. But with his demise, the remaining Blackwoods have retreated back into their castle and refused to participate. For the two sisters, it's the small pleasures in life that sustains them, not outside society. For them, their only interactions are to purchase supplies. It takes time and an insider to assist them, but ultimately society does indeed succeed in partially destroying them. But even with only two of them now remaining, left hunkered down in the basement of the burnt ruins, the Blackwoods stoutly refused to surrender. They would die first, and so they resign themselves to be living ghosts, and will perhaps, over the passage of time, become actual ones. We Have Always Lived in the Castle was met with critical acclaim upon its release, and has since been regarded as one of Shirley Jackson's finest works. Critics praised its psychological depth, dark humour, and its gothic atmosphere. Over time, the novel has gained a cult following and is celebrated as a masterpiece of American Gothic fiction. Modern readers and scholars often explore its feminist undertones, its critique of societal norms, and its exploration of mental illness and trauma. It's also worth noting that Stephen King has often cited Jackson and her works as an inspiration for his own writings, and this can be seen evident in his detailing of prosaic life, small town communities and their hostile actions under pressure, and even the damned edifices such as the Marston House and the Overlook Hotel. The novel has also inspired adaptations, including a stage play and a 2018 film directed by Stacey Passon. While interpretations vary, each adaptation highlights the enduring power of Jackson's story. I will also take this opportunity to recommend Josephine Decker's 2020 biopic entitled Shirley, although it should be noted that this is more centred on her novel Hangs a Man. We Have Always Lived in the Castle is a haunting exploration of isolation, human cruelty, and the resilience of the human spirit. It is a testament to Shirley Jackson's genius that this novel remains as compelling and unsettling today as it was in 1962. It contains a wealth of subtext and depth that enables endless analysis and debate 60 years plus and counting. But it's not the only thing that the novel brings to the table that has kept it interesting. It's not just a story about a dysfunctional family hiding away from the outside society. It is also very much a murder mystery too. At the heart of this novel lay the poisoning of over half the Blackwood family at a fateful evening meal 6 years prior to the commencement of the story. We hear various accounts and retellings, but in the end it all boils down to which one of the three survivors did it. Jackson wrote it in such a way as to ensure that there will never be a conclusive answer, but it is possible to give a weighting of probabilities. Uncle Julian is the least likely to have committed the act. His relationship with John Blackwood is actually unknown. We don't know if he's a brother or an in-law. If he's not actually a Blackwood by blood, then he would have the least potential sense of guilt or emotional trauma by committing the murder. No matter the actual nature of the relationship with the Blackwood patriarch, we do know that it appears to have been strained. When he speaks of John, it is often with a tone of sarcasm or resentment. There's also the suggestion that he was living under the financial dependence of John and therefore probably felt inferior to him. Or, if he was an in-law, then he would have also have felt something of an outsider too. The fact that he was financially dependent would make him more or less likely to have committed the murder based on his blood relationship. If he was an actual brother, then he would have stood to have gained the Blackwood estate. Should be noted that his wife died though we don't actually know the nature of his relationship with her at this time. They had clearly been married for some time, and it is possible he may have resented her too by this stage. A counter-argument to him having done the murder is that he was left severely poisoned and rendered disabled by it, and he appears to have no knowledge of poisons prior to the incident, so this is perhaps one of the strongest pointers that he did not do it. Out of the trio, he is the one who talks about the poisoning the most. He is in fact obsessed by it, seeming to have no ability to move beyond it. His life effectively stopped that night. My reading of it is that his entire world was destroyed by the murder, and his fractured psyche is trying to make some sense of the events that occurred. But subconsciously he knows that at least one of his nieces committed the dreadful act, and that this is a truth too painful to accept. Mary Cat is often the favoured culprit. She alone displays a dark, detached and violent mindset. Her constant reliance on magical ritual to protect herself and her home might suggest a sense of guilt and a fear of divine retribution. She does, in the last part of the novel, actually admit to having put the poison in the sugar bowl, although her status as an unreliable narrator may undermine this confession. She doesn't have much of a motive either. It is often stated that she did it because she adored her sister, which she clearly does, and wanted to secure their special relationship together without interference from any other party. Interestingly, when cousin Charles turns up on the scene and comes between the two sisters, Mary Cat does not resort to poisoning him. She actually makes a steady string of annoying escalations in the hope of driving him off, before resorting to the far more drastic house fire as a final resort. As an accomplished killer living in her own dream world, one would expect a far more immediate and deadly action from her, as they do always say that it is much easier to commit murder the second time around. She would have been only 12 when she committed the crime, and she was already very close to her older sister. She states in the book that she never took sugar, which is a clear indicator that there was no chance of her being poisoned by the arsenic. But she was also sent to bed without supper that very day, so there was little chance of her ever eating the arsenic, nor even having the opportunity to place the poison in the first place. It's my contention that the young Mary Cat's mind and psyche was destroyed by the poisoning death of her family, much in the same way as Uncle Julian. She now lives in a complete world of fantasy and is unable to discern the truth from fiction or reality from hallucination. And we should always remember that the reader only ever gets to see the world of the Blackwoods through her twisted lens. Constance was tried for the crime, but there was insufficient evidence. She was probably charged primarily due to being the person who prepared the meal. In line with Julian's feelings towards John Blackwood, it is indicated that the father was overbearing, strict and controlling with his two daughters. Constance, as a result, appears to have adopted many of her mother's traits in trying to please him with her meticulous execution of domestic duties. There is no indication of love or warmth for either of her parents. Perhaps she even feels a sense of relief at their removal. She certainly doesn't seem very fazed at their passing. Following the failed trial, she is still being referred to as the poisoner by the townsfolk, and it is clear that she is the scapegoat. Interestingly, it is revealed that she taught Mary Cat all her knowledge about poisons. And even with the indicators that Mary Cat committed the act, Constance is always loving to her. Did she perhaps manipulate her loyal younger sibling into committing the act in an ill-thought murder plot? It's certainly possible, but I think there's a far more likely turn of events. Only Constance, who was under pressure from her father, had the means and the motive, and being close to her sister, she would have been able to place the poison in the sugar bowl, safe in the knowledge that her younger sister would definitely not be affected. She probably didn't even know Mary Cat had been sent to bed without supper. She is never angry with Mary Cat because she knows her younger sibling didn't commit the act, and all she has to do to maintain the status quo of her new life together is to let Mary Cat's overactive imagination do its work in placing herself as the culprit as a result of survivor's guilt. Constance is the only one of the trio who appears calm and collected. She does not dwell on the fateful poisoning as she wants and needs to forget it. The knowledge of her guilt is what keeps her from going into town and from becoming angry with her sister and uncle who can't stop talking about the crime. She just wants to focus on the little things in life, like living in her castle and making the food. In the end, I believe it was probably Constance who did the fatal deed, but nothing's for certain, and we could just as easily toss a coin on it. But one thing is for sure, this book has oodles of style and things to say, and will keep the discerning reader's mind ticking long after they put it down. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into one of literature's most enigmatic works. If you've read We Have Always Lived in the Castle, let me know who you think did it, and what the most significant themes are in the comments. Which themes or moments resonated most with you? And if you haven't read it yet, I hope that this video inspires you to pick it up. So go easy on the sugar, as you never know what's in it. But before you do go and put that lump into your tea or coffee, be sure to like, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more literary explorations. Until next time, keep reading and stay cautious of large family meals.